Good morning. So, Arpit, thanks for coming. Really appreciate you coming and doing this for Open Networking Foundation. I want to thank you all for coming for this ONF Bootcamp. And I also want to thank AT&T for giving us this facility and hosting this bootcamp here. AT&T has been one of our very, very important partner all along, and this is one of the many things that AT&T has been doing for us, so really appreciate that. So today I'm going to tell you about what we are calling New ONF. As you know, there's this merger of Open Networking Lab and Open Networking Foundation. Some of you have been part of this journey all along, and so I appreciate you being here. You are very familiar with this journey, and some of you may be new, and so I thought I'll give you the context for this particular merger. As you know, Open Networking Foundation has been there from the very beginning of SDN, and ONF kind of brought SDN to the networking industry, in terms of evangelizing it and making it kind of mainstream in many ways. And then Open Networking Lab was something that was a sister organization started by the same people around the same time, and Open Networking Lab was leading a number of open source projects, namely ONOS and COD. And what we are trying to do is to bring them together so that we can do open source and standards together. At the surface level, it may seem like, it is very natural at this point. You're hearing a lot about wanting to bring open source and standards together. But as we are bringing them together, we are wanting to do both open source in a different way and standards in a different way, because our industry is changing. Okay. So as we are bringing them together, there are two big ideas that I hope you will walk away with. If you ignore everything else in my presentation or what I'm going to say, at least I hope you will walk away with two ideas that when we are combining Open Networking Lab and ONF, and when you're looking at what networking needs more than anything today, right? So first thing is that, as Arpit mentioned, there has been a proliferation of open source projects in networking. Even though networking was one of the last industries to adopt as open source, at the same time there has been a proliferation of open source projects in the networking industry in last 5 years. So what we think is that at this point, it is not about creating one more open source platform or a project. What we have to do as an industry is to build what we are calling solutions that are built with open source, that we can take it to network operators, we can take it to service providers, that they can use, put in practice and deploy, and do it in such a way that we build what we are calling this end-to-end innovation pipeline that are bringing multiple open source projects together to create solutions. So that is one idea which we think is extremely important for networking industry at this point, and not about just yet another open source project. The second thing is, when we think about standards, standards have been part of networking from very beginning, and they play a very, very important role. But I think we will all agree that over the last few years, standards have become, with the emergence of open source and so on, standards impact has been lesser and lesser. So how do we make standards more relevant? And how do we make standards more impactful and be able to work at the same speed as open source? Okay? And the way to do this is what we are calling software-defined standard. Yes, we are trying to be a little bit cute on software-defined aspects of it. But the idea here is that we should derive standards from working open source software. And as we bring open source pieces together, we need standards for interoperability, common information models, data models, and standards should be derived from that exercise rather than the old-fashioned way of sitting and spending a couple of years defining standard. So as you can see, on both open source side and standard side, we are trying to do what we think is right for the industry and move it forward in these two areas. Okay, so those are the two important ideas. The rest of it is kind of details. But I think what I want to take you through is this journey very quickly about how networking has progressed in the last 5 to 7 years. And as Arpit mentioned that we are going through a major transformation in networking, and networking is one of the last industries that is adopting open source. But the interesting thing is that networking is going through a major disruption in addition to open source. So this is something, take a minute to think about it. What has happened in last 5 years is there are major disruptive changes that are happening in networking, and open source happens to be one of them. And so what happens is when an industry is going to, we talk about Linux as an example in terms of open source. But if you look at Linux, operating system existed in the computing for 25 years before Linux came on the ground. It was a matured field, and then Linux came about and became an open source version of it. When you look at networking, networking is on one hand going through what you will call disaggregation, right? We used to build vertically integrated boxes, and now we are trying to build with merchant silicon white boxes and so on. That's a major disruption by itself. Then we have this whole SDN idea, separation of control and data plane, virtualization. Again, big changes. On top of that, we are bringing open source to networking. So it's a very disruptive for networking industry and very transformative on all these dimensions. And how do you make this work? How do we make sure that we create value and we can be successful? So as I mentioned, you might have seen me this. So when you think about disaggregation, open source, softwareization, here is one way to look at it, is entire stack. And at each stack, we have choices. We have now many merchant silicon. We have many open source control platforms, ONOS, ODL, just 2 examples. You go to next level, orchestration, automation, we have platforms, and then many open source and closed source virtual network functions and services. But when you think about all of this disaggregation, and now you think about either you are a service provider or you are a vendor, how do you consume all of this? This is such a major change. And as Arpit mentioned, every 3 months or 6 months, there is another open source project. There is another technology that is coming along. How do you think about consuming all of this? Right? That is the major challenge, or I would say that is kind of the major grand challenge for our networking industry. Oh, by the way, this also you might have seen. Now this is not only in data center and cloud, all of this is spreading across the networking industry. You name it and it is in every part of networking industry. Disaggregation, SDN, and open source is going across all this industry. Okay, so now how do you consume all of this? So we think right now the 3 most important things that our industry can be doing is what Linux Foundation calls harmonization among these multiple open source projects, right? But more importantly, not more importantly or whatever, harmonization plus being able to build integrated solutions that are easy to consume either by vendors as well as service providers as well. And then, of course, how do we create standards that are impactful, timely, and can really be useful to the industry? Am I communicating? Yes. Is this making sense? Some of you are part of this industry longer than even me, so hopefully this is making sense. And we want to keep it interactive and informal, so I don't have to finish my presentation. You can stop me anytime and we can get into a debate, discussion, and I'm happy to do it, right? Oh, please.
Hi, Drew and David Neighbors.
Of course.
Your first slide then? So, that one, yeah, those are your 2 big ideas. So, open source works on a principle of 1,000 flowers, which means lots of things get seeded and the best flourish. And there's a tension here between 1,000 flowers principle and actually having something with longevity to get to production that can be used by carriers. That first big idea makes me nervous, I'll be honest, because it says to me ONF is focusing on cord and ONOS. And that seems to have a tension with 1,000 flowers, because that says, how do I innovate if ONF is blessing 2 things?
So I guess if you stay tuned for my just maybe next couple of slides when I talk about open innovation pipeline and how in that context you can do swap and modularity, and I think you are probably familiar with. So stay tuned and see whether that makes sense and that answers your question.
Again, open source 1,000 flowers, the best ideas flourish. I want to make sure
So, but
that continues through ONF.
True. So I think you want let the 1,000 flowers bloom, and that is already happening in the industry to some extent. On the other hand, as I said, the network operators want a solution. And when you pick solution, you have to bet on few platforms and then innovate within that context.
But
okay.
You don't want that innovation to squash the next flower that is better than those few platforms.
Yes, I think so. And you have to do combination. And let me see when we talk about the open innovation pipeline whether that helps.
Okay. Shut up now. Thank you.
No, good, very good. Anything else that we can talk about at this point? Okay, so let me continue to this. Oh, okay. So what we are trying to do with this open innovation pipeline is see whether on one hand we want to be very focused on network operators and service providers, and we want to make sure that we are bringing value to the service providers and network operators. And the way we define that value is by saying we want to help service providers transform their infrastructure into what can be thought of as a platform for service delivery. Because end of the day, if I'm a network operator or if I'm a service provider, what I want to do is to take my network as a platform for service delivery, because that is what that is all about. Okay? And the second thing we want to do is we want to help the vendors so that if they have innovations coming on, we want to show a path for this innovation to get into an operational network quickly and will significantly reduce R&D than what it takes today. Okay, so that is what we are trying to do with the open innovation pipeline. And then, of course, software-defined standard that I mentioned, that is timely and all of that. So that is the two things that we are trying to do at Open Networking Foundation with this new model. Okay, so David, I hope this will answer your question, hopefully. So what has happened in last 5 years, as I mentioned, that this disaggregation and availability of many open source components. Okay, so what you have is now you have different programmable forwarding thing, you have different control plane. All of these building blocks are starting to become available. Okay, and they are available in open source. They are starting to be possible, right? So what we are wanting to do is that this disaggregation of building blocks enable open innovation pipeline, that we are able to put them together and be able to create a solution that we can take it to network operators. And when I say we, I don't mean just the Open Networking Foundation. It is talking about we as a community can take this and be able to create solutions and take it to the network operators. And not only that, what we want to do is as we are putting these pieces together in order to build the solution, we have an opportunity to define what can be thought of as software-defined standard. When we put pieces together to create solution, we have an opportunity to define APIs, we have opportunities to define whatever information models, data models, and so on. That is how they come together. And that's what we want to take advantage of as part of this transformation. And the second thing we are wanting to do is make sure that anywhere you have innovation in this pipeline, you are able to insert it into some kind of a solution that is going into a network operator's network, for example. And if we are able to do that successfully, what that means is if I'm a vendor, I am able to create an innovation, insert it into a solution, and take it to a network operator much more quickly to help reduce time to market and help reduce the R&D investment, because you don't have to solve this entire problem. You can create innovation, put it into this end-to-end solution, and drive it to a network operator's operational network. Please.
So I have a big question.
Yes, please.
What is the incentive for a vendor like Ericsson, who has the largest possible market share among the vendors, to give access to a third party for the controller? Why should he rely on another open source consortium for controller? Because he has a dominant market share. So why would he be interested in trying to give the control plane to an open source platform?
So again, I mean, that is what probably Arpit tried to answer, because with the open source ecosystem, if you are able to participate in that larger ecosystem, you can innovate faster with the reduced R&D. So that is the standard answer. Now, if I come back to Ericsson's dominant market share is in the radio access network. Okay, and if you look at where Ericsson is really innovating big, it is innovating mostly in the radio technologies. Okay, so imagine a particular model, so something what we are doing with say mobile card, where we let Ericsson innovate on the radio front and keep that proprietary, but in order to monetize the radio technology and be able to build the entire solution, there Ericsson today, in my opinion, spend a lot of R&D dollars to build a complete system where Ericsson is not really the leader in that space. Ericsson is not really the innovator. Ericsson's innovation, primary innovation in the radio technology. Now imagine if Ericsson is able to put most of its resources into radio, leverage the innovation that is going on around the radio technology and bring faster innovation to the market. I think it will have a better ROI on its investments.
Can I answer that question too from
Sure, please.
service provider point of view? So mostly for us would be interoperability. So if I'm already running some sort of listing technology in my network, right, and then you have some equipment, Ericsson, or like a big customer of Ericsson, of course, I would like to make sure that your equipment can actually run on my network. So that's like in a nutshell, what I would like to see from incumbents like you.
But he would not have complete control over the control plane, right? Because he's giving the control plane to you, so to SDN solutions providers. So that's where I'm not sure how hesitant would he be in trying to give the control plane access to an open source consortium, right?
Yeah, I mean, so when it's open source, it's going to be just open source, right? Somebody has to sort of like sanitize that open source. I mean, it has to be service provider or carrier grade open source software, right? It cannot be just, anything that comes out from an open source project. So that might be an opportunity for you guys to jump in.
But I mean, unless a vendor is going to make some profit off it, they're not going to donate to the open source.
Right.
And so unless the vendor's customers are saying, hey,
Exactly.
go to the open source or you're off the list, or they can find some other way to profit, they're just not going to go. Let's be honest, right?
So I think, but the business models have to change. I think it is pretty clear that the business model has to change. You have to know where you are innovating the most and where you can create the value. Everywhere else, if you can leverage the open source, and that's what the service providers are saying. It's not the service providers are saying that they are not willing to pay for anything. What they're saying is that we are willing to pay for things where we cannot innovate or somebody brings the value, but then we should be able to benefit from the larger innovation as well and not be bound to a few vendors. And that transformation is happening whether you like it or not. I think, so we have to invent the right business model for vendors as well as for the service providers. Okay, so I think, I don't want to take away, so Thyman, how much more time I have? 2 minutes? Okay, so let me quickly tell you that what we are trying to do is that to some extent we had this couple of innovation pipelines in operation, and then we are wanting to now generalize it, diversify it, industrialize it, whatever you want to call it. So one example of this innovation pipeline is what we have been doing with packet optical networks with say ONOS, where we have this and then you can bring different pieces of it. We can build a packet optical network as a solution, and there are some of the vendors that are trying to do that with these building blocks and taking as a solution to the service provider as well. And then there is this whole CORD project that you are going to hear a lot more about. And you can think of CORD project as well as an open innovation pipeline. And in this open innovation pipeline, you can insert different pieces. We are creating a solution, and that is the solution that many service providers are now trying in lab trials. Some of them are wanting to take it into field trial and potentially into the production deployment as well. And there are 3 variants of it that I think you will hear later. There is a residential CORD, then there is the mobile version of it, and then there is the enterprise version of it. I think because I'm running out of time probably, but you are going to hear You are going to hear about each one of them later in the day as well when we talk about COD. But again, the important thing to note here is there are these different building blocks, and if I have to answer to David's question again, in each one of these places, you can bring different building blocks and insert that and be able to still create a solution, and that's what you can take it. And so hopefully the industry can keep innovating and be able to bring appropriate building blocks, but then they don't have to invent the entire solution. They can plug in their particular innovation and still be quickly create a solution that they can take it to the network operator. Okay, I think this you already heard. There are many people, because when you build a solution that people can consume, you can see that the network operators and service providers really rally and they want to use it, and I think there is an appetite for using this and taking it into the production deployment as well. And this is yet another place where what we are trying to show is that there are opportunities to plug in different types of building blocks. We are building one particular end-to-end solution, or we are building one particular stack, but inside this, if you, for example, right now we are doing it with ONOS, but if you want to plug ODL into it, you are welcome to try to do that. Similarly, we have our own virtual network functions. If you want to bring another virtual network functions, you are welcome to tie that in and be able to plug that in. And then here are the opportunities for creating some software-defined standards, and there may be other areas where there are opportunities for creating software-defined standards. So I think, go ahead.
The new ONF. From a marketing perspective, how do we see ONF and ONF now? I mean, I still see two brands.
Oh,
Two organizations, right? Pillars. Is it coming together with a single brand?
yes, yes. So I guess you may be surprised that to merge two non-profit organizations is equally difficult. I mean, maybe. And so initially we thought, oh, two non-profit, who cares about merger of two non-profit? There must be, but to merge two non-profit also you have to go through certain legal process. So by end of July or early August, the merger will be completed, and then it will be all Open Networking Foundation. And Open Networking Lab, in some sense, is the lab aspect of Open Networking Foundation. But there will be a one Open Networking Foundation as the organization. Okay? Should I stop? Okay. So I think we have to at least keep to some schedule. So I think maybe with that I'll stop and we will have more time for discussion. Okay? All yours.